I think sometimes um, some of the projects that you plan and you work on so hard and you feel like, man, all the cards are in place and stuff like that, this is really going to happen. And then for some reason, things sort of just get they get off the rails somewhere along the line, right? And then some of the things that have been sort of like the most successful, they just like appear. They just kind of different avenues that you weren't really going down show up, and those turn out to be some of your most successful ventures.
Well, welcome to the podcast today. My name's Jason Tonioli, and I have an amazing special guest with me today, Brent Maher, who is a 7-time Grammy-winning producer, engineer, songwriter. Brent, I think I think you've got over 20 songs that were multi-singles that were multi-platinum. You've worked with the Judds and Dolly Parton, Kenny Rogers, Willie Nelson, Merle Haggard, Tina Turner, Lainey Wilson. Like the credits went so long, and the amount of songs. When I started looking you up, you literally took me back to my growing up days with some of these songs from the Judds that I had just playing. And it was just like nostalgia all over. And it also, from what I see, you were able to help work on Elvis Presley's last big hit as well, I believe, too.
Yeah. I recorded and engineered his last #1 record. Yeah.
That's amazing. So Brent, welcome today to the podcast. I am so excited to talk with you and kind of share your story with people. And then we're going to for sure talk about what I think is one of the coolest music projects I have seen in a long time. That's a book that you've put together that it's incredible. But let's do this. Let's kind of start with your kind of beginning journey and kind of how did you first fall in love with music and end up getting into the music scene? Because I believe you were an Air Force mechanic when you started out your career, and that was probably what you thought you were going to be when you grew up.
Yeah. Well, it's my family always had music in the house, and my first instrument was trumpet, and that was like, I guess, in the 5th grade, something like that. And then my family relocated to Denver, actually. And then the trumpet went away, and I discovered guitar. And so, we'd have our little 2-man bands and 3-man bands and stuff like that, and playing basement parties and stuff like that. But, instead of, once I got out of high school, I decided to join the Air Force. And so, my buddy that I joined with was my little friend guitar player, Eddie, And so once we got into our tech school, out of basic training, we had our little guitars and our amps shipped to us, and we just picked up where we left off, sort of in high school. And we'd go play in, basements and any place we could play. And then when I got stationed in my permanent party, I put together a pretty good little combo, cover band, of course, and it was nice, for the weekends, bringing in that extra, $40-50 a month was a big deal back then. And but when I was about a year out, I realized that me making a living as a guitar player would be a stretch, to say the least, right? And so I got thinking, well, you know what? I don't see myself as a career Air Force man. I didn't see that in my future. And I had this deep love for music ever since I've been a child. And so one night I was listening to Curtis Mayfield and the Impressions. And Janelle, my wife, and the kids were in bed. And I looked at this record jacket, and on the bottom right-hand side, it said recording engineer and this fellow's name. And it was just like a light bulb went off. It was just like, well, there, problem solved. I'm going to be a recording engineer. And, oh my gosh, if anybody would have told me, like, do you know what the chances of that are? And But I started taking out some courses during my last year from ICS, I think it was called, in acoustics, electronics, and things like this. Did not learn anything, but I got within about, about a week before I was going to be discharged, after 4 years. And I felt, well, it might be a good time to go get me a job, And I was stationed in Nashville. That's how I got in Nashville. This was my permanent party station. And so I looked in the phone book, and at that time there were only about 5 studios in Nashville, if you can imagine that. Now there's probably 60, if not more. So anyway, I tore out the yellow page, and in the first page there was it was a garage studio, and I went inside there, and I was shown the door to go back out probably in less than a minute. I said, well, we'll just check that one off. And then I went to RCA, and they were much more polite. And in about 4 minutes, I was, said, well, thank you, but no thanks. And then I checked that one off, and I said, God, I've only got 2 more doors. One was Columbia Records. So I went in there. That probably took about 4 or 5 minutes, and I was back in my car. Now I'm getting really worried because there's one more door, just one more door to walk through, and it was called Foster Recording, and I, was quite depressed. And so I got to the address, and it was downtown on 7th Avenue, and you had to go into this alley, and big signs everywhere saying, if you block this alley, your car will be towed before you can even, take a breath. So anyway, there was no place to park. But I figured, you know what? I can go upstairs, I can be told no, and I can get back to my car before anybody tows it off, I'm sure. So I blocked the alley, and I get in this elevator, and I go up to the 3rd floor, and I'll tell you, Jason, I mean, I was really worried. I was really, really concerned. And it opens up to this beautiful foyer, and this real attractive brunette gal's behind this totally hip desk. And she says, well, may I help you? And I said, well, yes, I'd like to apply for a job. And she says, oh, as what? And I says, as a recording engineer. And she said, oh, you're a recording engineer? And I said, no, but I want to learn how to be a recording engineer. And then she says, well, let me get one of the engineers out here and talk to you. Wow. So anyway, this wonderful guy, Tommy Strong, very, very successful engineer, came out, and I told him, well, I'm getting out of the Air Force next week, and I'm a musician and of some sorts, and I've been taking courses out in acoustics and electronics and things like this, and I want to learn how to be a recording engineer. And he goes, huh. He says, well, oddly enough, the studio manager and chief engineer, Bill Porter, whom I'd never heard of course, little did I know he was literally one of the most famous engineers, not just in Nashville, but the whole country. And he said, Bill and I were talking just last night that we have a young fella here that we've sort of been trying to groom to be, an assistant engineer and grow into being an engineer, but he's really a songwriter. And if he has a spare moment, he's in some office somewhere trying to write a song. And we really need somebody. He said, so can you come back tomorrow and interview with Bill Porter? And I said, of course. So anyway, I come back the next day, give Bill the same story. And, it was just one of those magical things, Jason, when I look back on it. And they said, well, I'll tell you what, we desperately need somebody. We're very busy. And we can give you 3 months. And in 3 months, we'll have an idea whether you have the aptitude, to put you in, full training etc.
Hmm.
And um, I was just beyond grateful and so thrilled. And when I went home and told Janelle, man, she was so excited. And I knew in my heart of hearts, these guys ain't letting me go in 3 months. I'm going to, whatever I have to do, I am not going to disappoint anybody. And so that's how I got my start. And really at that time, all I want that was my career path. I mean, I had an open door to my career path, and I was putting my guitar under the bed and it could stay there. And that's how I got my opportunity to be, in the business, you know.
Well, that's amazing. Well, and I think what I love about hearing that is the first 2 and 3 doors you went to showed you the door, and most people after 1 or 2 rejections like that are gonna quit, right? And I think sometimes you just gotta be willing to show up is half the battle and not give up. So thank goodness you didn't stop at the third one and just say, "Oh, I've never heard of this Foster group," and not even
Yeah,
showed up, right? And
yeah.
luckily your car didn't get towed either, probably, right?
No, I got down in the car and I'd been up there for probably 30 minutes. No, 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 it was the whole thing, when you look back, I was just like a miracle. And, so, when that 3-month trial ran its course, we went down to this place called Morrison's Cafe to have lunch, and I was counting the days, and so I knew that, "Oh my god, I think today's today." Well, I knew it was. So, Bill and Tommy and myself, we went to, Morrison's, and we're going through getting our trays and roast beef and mashed potatoes, green beans, whatever. We sit down and we eat, and nobody's talking about anything except, what's on the books for next week and, who's doing what sessions. And, then finally Bill says to me, Brent, your trial period is pretty much, it's up today. This is today." And I went, "Yeah, I thought we were getting pretty close." And he says, "Well, I've got something for you." And he reaches into his pocket and he pulls out these little business cards. And it said, "Brent Maher, assistant recording engineer, Foster Recording." And I'll tell you what,
Wow.
I almost it it was all I could do to keep from crying. I was so moved and so happy, you know.
Yeah.
And then that was
Was
that.
it so you obviously had some incredible mentors, early on in your career. I'm curious, I mean, are there any specific lessons that have really stuck with you, from those early days? And I mean, you were doing your very best and trying to work, over deliver everything you could, but I'm just curious if there was any specific lessons that you can think back on with those early days that have stuck with you.
Well, um, I think, attention to detail is absolutely paramount in the whole process of recording. And back when I started, you know, um, in digital recording, there's these little buttons everywhere that say undo, where you can always fix something where you made a mistake. When I started, of course, it was all tape machines and analog. There were no undo buttons. And so
Yeah.
you had to be on top of your game all of the time, you know? And so I don't know. I just, that has never left me. I love setting up for my own sessions. I mean, I have a great young engineer that has kept up with all the technology changes, which, I've let kind of slide because now I'm more of a producer and a songwriter, which is a whole
Yep.
nother story. And so, but still, and I take absolute pleasure. And when the session's over, I like to tear down. I like to coil the cables just right. I like to put them up. And so, as simple as that sounds, but it means a lot to me that, I never wanna lose that connection of where I first started.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. And I think as I talk with people when people become a bit, we'll call it a big deal or whatever you want to call, when people think you've arrived, I think it's interesting to see how nearly everybody who's kind of worked their way up through that path still is just fine getting down. And I mean, I still take out the garbage and clean the toilets type of thing. And it's just being a real human being and not, curling those cords up is super important because when you got to pull them out, there's nothing worse than having a cord that's tangled and cut. As you're
Yeah.
trying to put on a good, be ready and prepared, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
no, that's some great thoughts. So with your career as you kind of went on, I know you, I believe you kind of helped discover the Judds and that was one of your main groups that you really have worked with over. I mean, you worked with a lot, but that was one that, I think they've did it around 10 albums with you, and the
Mhm.
sound you were able to get with them is incredible. For any music audio nerd, you need to go listen to some of the guitar stuff that you were doing with that group because it's incredible. I mean, that stuff is timeless and probably a master class on sound people try to even recreate it still to this day. But I'm just curious, what do you remember about, how that came to be and what would people find interesting with that story
Well,
there?
there again, I think sometimes, um, some of the projects that you plan and you work on so hard and you feel like, man, all the cards are in place and stuff like that. This is really going to happen. And then for some reason, things sort of just they get off the rails somewhere along the line, right? And then
Yep.
some of the things that have been sort of like the most successful, they just like appear. They just kind of like different avenues that you weren't really going down show up, and those turn out to be some of your most successful ventures. And the Judds were certainly one of that. I discovered the Judds from, unfortunately, my daughter was in a terrible car accident, and she was at the Williamson County Hospital for about 3 weeks in Franklin, Tennessee here. And Naomi Judd was a registered nurse,
Hmm.
and she was assigned to Diana's floor. And I had heard of Naomi and Winona because they used to be on this morning show, the Ralph Emery morning show here in Nashville. And
Mhm.
my wife, of course, was getting up at the crack of dawn to get the kids to school, and I'd be still in bed. But she would yell at me, "Brad, you got to come down here and hear these girls," and I'd stumble down to bed once in a while. And I liked them okay. Um, but anyway, I knew who Naomi was. So when Diana got released from the hospital, Naomi comes up to me and says, "Could I give you like a tape that my daughter Winona and I have just recorded in our kitchen on like just a portable cassette deck?" And I said, "Well, sure." And she said, "Y is graduating from high school, like, in a few months. And, I just love your honest opinion on whether this is something we should sort of maybe pursue, or maybe we just, you know, get upon our life the way it is and just do whatever comes in front of us." And I said, "Well, I'll be glad to listen to it." So anyway, I was really busy at that time. I was working on an album with Kenny Rogers. And so it took me a couple of weeks to actually listen to the tape. And so I had it sitting sort of next to the telephone in the kitchen, and I was going to work, and Janelle, my wife, says to me, "Is that Naomi's tape?" And I said, "Yeah." She says, "Well, what'd you think of it?" And I said, "Well, I haven't listened to it." She said, "Excuse me? You haven't listened to it?" And I said, "Well, hon, I've been working with Kenny every day." She said, "It's a 30-minute drive to work, you know? You telling me you're so busy that you can't find a few moments after how sweet and how caring she was to our daughter? That is despicable." And she pretty much said, "Don't come home tonight if you don't listen to this thing," you know? So anyway, I took that reprimand to heart, and as soon as I pulled out of the driveway, I stuck it in the car and I listened to it. And by the time I got into the studio, I couldn't wait to get on the phone. Naomi had her number written there on the tape, and I called her, and the first thing I did was apologize, number one, for taking so long. And then secondly, I said, I would love for us to get together and just, talk music and kind of get to know each other some. And so she was so happy. So literally, I think in just a day or two, I went over to their house and had my guitar with me, and we broke our guitars out, started playing music, and they had some records they wanted to play me of some artists that inspired them. And so that's sort of what we did for about close to 9 months. I would go to their house maybe 2, 3 times a week, and we would just play music or talk about music. But we were forming sort of an idea of what we might be able to chase down. And then
Yeah.
eventually, we wound up doing a little demo tape in the studio with just Y playing guitar and her singing and Naomi singing harmony. And that was it. And that, eventually winds up in front of Joe Galante, who was the president of RCA Records. And he liked it enough to where we had a sit down with myself and Y and Naomi and their manager at that time. And we played about 3 songs. Mama, He's Crazy was one of them. John Deere Tractor was another one. And I think the other one's actually our first single, song called Had a Dream. All quite different, but you could see how they could all work together.
Mhm.
And then when it was over, Joe Galante came up to me and he said, "So Brent," he said, "what kind of records are you going to make with these girls? I mean, what are you thinking?" And I said, "Joe, not a whole lot different than what you heard today. I want to base it around acoustic guitars. And if you could think about the song Mrs. Robinson by Simon, by Simon and Garfunkel,
Mhm.
remember the energy and the power that that had with just those acoustics and that acoustic bass and drums and things like that." And I said, and then mm, slip into the Everly Brothers world about how they would feature the acoustics, Don's rhythm playing. And I said, somewhere in the middle there's some common ground that I think we can land in. And he just said, brilliant. I love it. And we wound up getting a deal that night. And then about, I don't know, 3 or 4 months later came the first single, Had a
Mhm.
Dream. And it just set everybody upside down. I mean, I would get phone calls from program directors from around the country saying, what is going on with these girls? We play this record and phone lights up, for 30 minutes. And it was it was a fast moving train, I can tell you.
Yeah. And I'm just curious, as you'd bring them into the studio, was there any unique process or anything that you felt like was different than any other artist you were bringing in and doing? I mean, was their personalities different, or, was it just a really trusting relationship you'd already built with them that just really brought out the best in them, do you feel like?
Well, I think what happened for sure is I spent so much time and even recording things on the little portable deck they had there with just live playing guitar. Sometimes I'd play with her. And I got so used to that sound. That was one thing. And her voice and Naomi's harmonies would just jump out at you. And then I introduced them to a guitar player in town named Don Potter. And Don was not even a session player in town. He was a New York player from Rochester, but, could play country music, could play jazz. In fact, he was in Chuck Mangioni's band for probably 10 years. And he came in town, and we got to be really good friends. And I loved the way he played because it was just coming from a different place than anybody else. And the sound of his guitar and his touch and everything was just amazing. So I introduced him to the girls, and of course they just fell in love with him. And I felt, you know what, man, this is the thing. Don's guitar playing, Y's playing, them singing, we are building everything around that. And so what we would do on virtually every song that we recorded, we would do a pre-production demo. And it would be just Dawn and myself, the girls, and we would, basically audition, so to speak, the songs that either I had written or had gathered from other songwriters and people like that, or a song that Naomi wrote, and we'd try them on to see how they fit just with us. And if that worked, then plugging in bass drums and steel and whatever else we were going to do was just like piano was just like a cakewalk. And we would play those demos and we'd have all the harmonies worked out and everything. Most of the signature guitar licks, like that incredible lick on Why Not Me, that wah, 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 wah. We all that got worked out in pre-production. And so when the rest of the band would show up, it was like the recipe is half done. It was so obvious to them of what they needed to play.
Yeah.
And so the sessions were pretty much effortless, and we just kept growing in with that sort of a platform.
Yeah. I think that's super, super smart to keep it just simple and clean. And
Mhm.
if it works when it's simple, it's like you said, it's super easy to put the frosting and sprinkles on top for
Absolutely.
those supporting, instruments. When you're cooking in the kitchen,
Yeah.
that's smart. But and my
Well,
guess is by go ahead.
I was gonna say, when we did a box set, the 3rd or 4th CD in the box set is all of those demos, all of those pre-production
Fun.
demos. And you
Yeah.
listen to those, like Why Not Me and Mommy, He's Crazy and songs like that, Rockin' With Your Rhythm, and then you hear the regular record, it's just like you can see how they dovetail.
Yeah. Well, and some of them, if you're a big fan, I think for any artist out there doing something like that, where you do have that, original track, the MTV Unplugged, we'll call it, type
Yeah,
version. I think those
yeah,
are really fun, and I think for independent artists, from a marketing standpoint, the creation process, I think oftentimes is your fans are as interested in that, if not more interested than the final product maybe that gets produced, because your personality comes through, the stories with it behind those songs are much more meaningful, when they're kind of in the creation birthing phase of the song, right?
yeah, for sure. And the other thing too, Jason, it, a lot there were some songs that we felt that we all liked, but man, when we got to, like, getting down to the meat and potatoes, they didn't live. For whatever reasons, they just never caught that spark of, "Oh my gosh, when this is done, oh, I can't wait." And some of them turned out to be hit songs for other people, like, I wrote this song with, Mike Reed, it's called, "Some Kinda Trouble,"
Hmm.
and we wrote that for the Judds, and we went in to do a pre-production demo, and we messed with that thing for probably 3 hours, and the girls loved it, and it just laid there like a lame duck. And so finally, we just said, "You know what? Enough's enough. This just isn't working." And so we just put it aside, and, that was that. And then Mike Reed calls me, I don't know, 2 months later and said, "Hey, Jerry Crutchfield just heard Some Kind of Trouble, and he wants to cut it on Tanya Tucker." And I said, "Great, perfect."
Cool.
That turns out to be a #1 record on Tanya Tucker. So it wasn't the fault of the song. It As much as we thought it was, it just didn't fit the girls. And that
Yeah.
was as important to know about what songs did work and which ones didn't work.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious. So this is a problem I see happen with lots and lots of creative people, musicians, artists, whatever in that creative field. we oftentimes get in kind of a zone where we're creating something and then it's very easy to get distracted. We call it, chasing squirrels. How how do you keep artists in the studio or just artists in general? How do you help keep them focused enough on getting a finished product versus like chasing the next one and the next one and the next one
Mhm.
on there? Do you have any tips that you've seen over the years to keep artists on task?
Well, I've never known, I've never had that issue with artists, but this is a really good question, Jason, because I've had people say to me as a producer, because for how many hours most artists will spend in the studio, an engineer and producer will triple that, if not more, right?
More.
And, so I can't tell you how many people have asked me, like, So you're telling me that when you work on a song and a basic track, you may be working on that one thing for months? I said, well, yeah, but not every day. No, of course not every day, but a lot of energy and a lot of time. And you could easily spend, 100 hours easily. And listening to the same song. And I said, yeah, listen to the same song. And well, how do you do that? How do you not just get sick and bored to death of it? And so here's what I've always done. Somehow I can go back to the original first moment that I ever heard that song. Whether it's another songwriter that is playing something for me, like, "Hey, Brent, can you check this out?" And it just lights me up. I can revert and go back to that exact feeling just like that. And
Mm,
so anytime, and I really don't, I enjoy and love this process so much, Jason. I mean, in a room of 2 or 3 players, this monstrosity behind me, um, those are just manna from heaven for me. And, but anytime that, people will ask me that, and, the best way I can answer them is that I just don't ever fall out of love with the tune. I don't. I stay in love with that tune until it's out there, and I've always been able to do that. I don't know if they believe me, but that's
awesome.
what I say.
So you've worked with so many great artists over the years. I'm curious to get your take on what do you feel like are some similarities or common things that these great artists all have in common? I mean, what do you feel like makes a great artist?
Oh gosh. Whew. Um, well, perseverance. Perseverance and pretty much this feeling that if I wasn't doing this, I have no options. I don't know what I would do. I had one artist, I won't mention his name, he's a star, and people would ask him, um, like, "Man, you know, I've been playing guitar and writing songs for years, and, I'm actually, a banker, or I own a chain of grocery stores, whatever I do. But, sometimes I think I just need to really follow my heart and forget all that and just be an artist." And my friend would say, "No, no, no. The only way that you can survive in this business is it's the only thing you can do, because the ups are ups and the downs are way downs, and the only way that you can survive that is just who you are." And, the first time he told me that, I said, "Well, God, that's kinda cold." And he said, "No, Brent, it's the truth." He said, "Do you disagree with me?" And I said, "Well, I guess I don't really." So that's one thing. I think it has to be something that's it drives you so much, you know? And
Yeah.
then to get to this superstar level, like like Tina Turner is one of my favorite artists that I had the chance to work with, and Ike and Tina, and then Tina by herself. And, they all had that. They all have that. But when you get to there's different levels of success we can have in any form of business, right? No matter what you're doing, there's always sort of like the elite. And to me, that's just a God-given gift. It hadn't been coached in, it hadn't been X amount of hours of doing this repetitive exercise, whatever it is. Some people, you just have this extra gift. And then you put that together with perseverance and dedication, then you're on your way. And those are the things that I've sat back and look at all of the artists that we would consider stars.
Yeah. What if you were sitting in front of the 20 or let's even say 25, 30-year-old self, if you could go back and give yourself some advice, what advice would you give yourself, your younger self?
Oh my gosh. Advice that I would give myself, Jason. That's a question. Nobody's ever asked me that. What advice? I don't know. Um, if I have anything that I think I could have done better is probably, um, there's a good amount of sacrifice. That's the other thing, I guess, that you have to tie into that type of success. You
Yeah.
know, there's a certain amount of sacrifice. And there again, not just in the entertainment business or me as a producer and engineer, stuff like that, everybody. And a lot of that, you take away time from other people. Sometimes you take away time from yourself that you would like to have back, right? But you're so driven, you don't see that. And so if I could have given myself some advice 25, 30 years ago, um, as an example, when I was working at United Recording in Las Vegas, which is where I did Proud Mary and a bunch of those records, I would work all day. I would come home with the kids, and then we would have dinner, and I would help put them back to bed, and then I'd go right back to work. And I would work till maybe 2 in the morning, and I would probably do that 3, 4, 5 times a week, working on different projects. Looking back, I wish that I'd done that 1 or 2 days a week, not 4 or 5 days a week, right? Um, little things like that. Um, make time for a few other stuff to weave in and out of your life, I guess. But all in all, I don't know. I think it worked out okay.
I would say it definitely did. I think it's interesting um, as I talk with a lot of people, the finding balance with your, personal life, family life, relationships,
Mhm.
whether that's friends. I think oftentimes when we get into the thick of, pursuing whatever we think is, the important project, it's sometimes hard you lose focus sometimes of that balance
Yeah,
that it's needing to be there. And I think sometimes you can lose focus on what actually is important and is going to matter long term versus, yeah, it was important you stayed till 2, 3 in the morning sometimes for those projects. But then I think on others, when you look back, you're like, well, did that really matter? Or did being at
mhm,
my kid's ball game or, some of those things that
yeah,
we just think, oh, there'll be another one of those. There's some simple things. And I do see a lot of times when somebody's super, super driven that we sometimes prioritize a little bit.
mm,
I don't know that it's wrong, but it's, sometimes the priorities may not um, be exactly where they ought to be, and you may have some regrets sometimes on decisions we made there as artists. So, yeah, that's interesting. That's what came up. I'm curious. I mean, you've worked with all of these super successful people. Uh, Now, when you hear the word successful musician, what would you define as a successful musician today? If you were giving some advice to kind of younger musicians that are up and coming, what would you tell them, to consider maybe as a definition for success?
Oh boy, definition of success. Well, I think that's so varied. There again, I think that sort of depends on your motor, your drive,
Yeah.
you know? Um, I think the definition is, are you happy? Are you happy with what you're doing? I know people who are unbelievably successful, but they're not happy because they will always put things in front of them, or they're always worried about, will they ever be able to duplicate what they've already done? Opposed to
Yeah.
just living in this particular moment, and being grateful for wherever you're at as a player or as an artist or whatever, a record producer.
Yeah.
Um, that's sort of what I would say about that.
I think that's a brilliant answer. And it's so simple and what a measure. I think that's one of the best answers I think I've ever had. There's the gold nugget for anybody listening to this. Go back and listen to that again.
Well, I'm glad
So
I
so
didn't go on.
so Brent, I want to dive into this new project that has really got me excited. The Night of the Orphan Train. So
Mhm.
you've put together this. It's audio book, but it's a whole lot of songs and just a cool project. And I don't think a lot of people are even aware of what the Orphan Train maybe even was. So
Yeah.
I, for those that aren't familiar with it, from I think it was like 1854 or so
Mhm.
into the early 19th century, there
Yeah.
was, basically a group of kids. They would round up orphans and move them from the big cities. And New York, I think, was a big hub of that. But they would
Yeah.
move them out to the west to go be adopted, essentially.
Right.
I think it was close to 250,000 kids were moved, which is just a
Yeah.
crazy number of people. And I think it's kind of one of these stories that I don't think people even realized happened. And I just think, I mean, share a little bit about what that, historically, what was that, and what is it that moved you to make you want to write songs and, pursue what you've done over the last several
Yeah.
months or years? Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, Jason, you talk about something coming out of the blue or something that, was it fate? Was I just supposed to do this? I don't know about that. But so here's the story. My wife and I were driving back home from Estes Park, Colorado, back here to Franklin. And about right in the middle of Kansas on I-70, I just look to my right and I see this huge road sign and it says, exit here, visit the Orphan Train Museum, Concordia, Kansas. I'm going 70, 75 miles an hour, and I look in my rearview mirror, and there's this little waify child, very period, you could tell way back in the day, and
Yeah.
Orphan Train Museum. And I just went, I've never heard of any such thing. So my wife, you know, hops on the computer and types in Orphan Train Museum, Concordia, Kansas. It pops right up. It's a Smithsonian Museum.
Hmm.
We had a day and a half of travel in front of us, and practically every second of it was taken up by reading all of the information that museum has there to study and to learn about, and then all kinds of other links to other websites uh, that are connected to that whole movement. And you pretty much said it. During that period of time, which is about 60 years of time, the problem that we had in our country is we had, well, no social services. That hadn't been developed yet. So when families would come onto hard times, whether it's death or whether it's World War I, whether it's, all kinds of economic downturns, whatever it was, if you hit rock bottom, there was no safety net of any kind. Well, during that period of time, we've all heard of the Spanish flu that would ravage these big cities, especially New York. And then there were variations of that. Well, what happened, Jason, is when like the Spanish flu would come through, let's say New York, tens of thousands of people would die because nobody even knew what it was, right? They didn't, the medical profession had no idea. And so a lot of times, parents might survive, kids didn't. Well, if you didn't have any family apparatus to help you or something, you could be a 9-year-old that has no mother and father, and you have no home. You have nothing. And so for that period of time, you could basically go to most corners of the city and you would see little starving kids huddled up in corners and alleyways and things like this. And my wife and I were down in Brazil about 15 years ago. I was going to work with a Brazilian artist down there. And so they wanted us to come down and spend some time with it, which we did. Spent time in Rio, spent time in Sao Paulo. And it was so disturbing because you could be in the most beautiful parts of Rio or Sao Paulo, and you come to a stop sign, and you're stuck in traffic, and these little kids are trying to sell you, beating on your windows to sell you one stick of gum. And you can't. We were told, do not roll down your window, because if you do and give them anything, then they're just going to crush the whole car, and we won't be able to move an inch. And it was very depressing. In fact, I couldn't wait to get home, really. But anyway, that's sort of, I could revisit, the feelings of what I felt there, a few years ago in Brazil to what it was like back in the day in New York, because we've never seen that here where, I have never seen that before. So anyway, that left such an impression on me. And by the time we were 3/4 of the way home, which would have been past St. Louis, heading south on, 64 and 24 back to Nashville, I started this song. It's simply called Orphan Train. And I had the first verse, and not be able to have a guitar thing just in my head. And I had the first verse and the first chorus written. And in that song, 3 little kids were sort of given birth, 3 little orphan kids, Caroline, Billy, and Jacob. And by the time I got home, those little critters were alive and well in my head. And the next day I was working with Trey Hensley and Rob Ickes on one of their records. And we were supposed to be writing towards their record. And we started talking, well, how was your vacation, Brent? I said, oh, it was great and great and great. And I said, but you know what? I found out some information about our country I had no idea about. So I told them about this story, and they were like flabbergasted, because, I told them what they would do. There was this Methodist minister. I'm sort of changing gears here. Anyway, I'll go back to the story of the song. So I played them the song, and they said, man, maybe we could write that today, and maybe we could put it on our record. I figured, let's do it. So the 3 of us finished up that tune. And so backing up a wee bit now, there was this Methodist minister back in the day. We're talking back in the early 1900s now, William Loring Brace. And this dilemma with all of these children was just killing him. And then finally, he came up with this idea and ran it by some other successful businessmen and businesswomen in New York City about what if all of these immigrants that are coming in to our country now, a lot of them are heading west. They're not just satisfied staying here in the city. They want land. And what if we could put together these kids off the street in this family that could use a son, could use a daughter, could use an infant, could use a teenager. How can we put them together? And so they came up with this idea of like, well, let's just say we scoop some of these kids off the street, we put them in a train car, or start off with the box cars, and let's just say we're going to send them to Topeka, Kansas. Well, we're going to call the Methodist church there and some other churches and say, there's a box car full of 50 kids heading your way. We're going to send you a bunch of flyers that say, I need to be adopted. I need a home. I need to be loved, whatever they put on them. Put them in barbershops, grocery stores, wherever, right? And get yourself vetted. If people say, I'd like to maybe show up and get one of these kids, well, they supposedly got vetted, which is a hit and miss situation, as you can imagine.
I'm sure.
And, but these train cars would find their destination and people would show up and they would look these little kids over and sometimes kind of check them out like cattle, look at their teeth, look in their ears, look in their hair, have you got any muscles to help out on the farm? And, but like you said, over that period of time, as it started to really develop, it went from one boxcar with 50 kids to taking over of 250,000 kids off of the streets of New York City into every state in the Union. So I couldn't really figure out how to write about 250,000 kids. And so, I settled on 3. And there again, it was Caroline, Billy, and Jacob, fictitious little kids. And so I wrote this, it's a fictional story, but it's based with all these historical facts, going back to, we meet the kids when they're at 1911, when they happen to be 11 years old. And then we follow their lives from 1911 until like 1922 or something like that. And by then they're like 22 years old. And at the end of Act 1, you meet them at 11. At the end of Act 1, they're like 14. Then there's a time jump when Act 2 starts, and then they're 18, and then you follow them till like around 22. And so
this has kind of become, I mean, I envision this as all like a stage play that could be done with a lot of the stories, the way,
yeah, I've heard a lot of people.
There's so many directions you could go.
Yeah, it's been, some of the folks that have read this said, God, this is just a blueprint for a movie or a blueprint for, a stage play of some sort. But right now, it's this, it's an audio book, and I wrote it as if you were sort of listening to a radio play. Like it's narrated, and probably a third of what you hear as an audiobook is the narrator setting up a scene. Then all of a sudden, the children are speaking, through the narrator's voice, first person. And then all of a sudden, there'll be a song that needs to be sung to wrap something up or to finish up some emotional moment, right? And so there are 20 songs that are embedded in the storytelling. And there's songs that are like, will put a tear in your eye, more than likely. And there's some other ones that just celebrate the strength and the resiliency of these little kids, and the 3 main characters, Caroline, Billy, and Jacob, they do, fate brings them together at the beginning of the book, and they sort of form this little family nucleus that is the one thing that they want more than anything in the world is a family. And so they make that their little family, and you follow them through the ups and downs. And of course, World War I winds up being, sort of in the middle of the second act. So there's a covers quite a bit of ground, and I think most people will feel it's pretty entertaining, and educational.
Well, and the music, I've not had a chance to listen to all of it yet, but the music is just phenomenal, like world class. I mean, obviously it's going to be world class if your hands in it, and you've written these all these songs as well. But um, people need to go check this out. So if somebody wants to go check out that book, where's the best place for them to find it and kind of experience it in the right way?
Yeah, it's on Amazon, it's
Mhm.
on Audible, Barnes and Noble, and it's an audiobook, so you stream it however you want to, however you, if you're an audiobook listening person, it's however, whatever you're streaming that from, it's all there available. And all you gotta do is type in the night of the, or just night of the Orphan Train, and go to Amazon or Audible, whatever, and it pops right up. Um, and but it's all right there.
Well,
Oh, and
go
we
check it out.
also,
So
well, I was gonna say we also just released a CD of the soundtrack, and it's, you know, all the kids that are singing the songs and the narration. It's, well, the narration wouldn't be there. It's just all of the songs, and
yeah.
um, and I love listening to those too. I love listening to just the music.
Well, and so I'm gonna kind of look at this from a marketing perspective, just to um, for any artist that's listening. So what I think is so unique with this is, as an artist, we go make 10 songs or 20 songs, and you put you used to put this CD out. And the hard thing is nobody, you have one or two good songs, and most of the time nobody ever would listen to the whole album, or, and they certainly a lot of times didn't care about what was on the album. It might get a little hit or a pop on a news thing, but that was
Mm,
it. But what I think is brilliant in this, and as an art, if you're an artist listening, I think it's very, very important that we recognize the stories that lead to the music that we create that means something
mhm,
to us. And I think the more as an artist where you can kind of tell that origin story, or the emotions, or you talked about earlier, the feelings that you had when you first heard that song, if you can help people tap in and connect with those feelings, and then bring them into that song. That, I mean, I look at a lot of, these superstar people when they, people want to go hear their songs, but at concerts, some of the very favorite parts of those concerts are when you have that artist tell you about being in the studio, or how that song came about. And I think as musicians and artists, especially today with all of these social media platforms and YouTube and all of the things that exist, we need to be sharing those stories behind the music, and just
mhm,
kind of leading your people along, because you literally have a worldwide audience for your concert, and you do need to tell those stories. And I think what you've done with this is an absolute master class on how to weave in this, the story with the songs. And I'm sure there's always things we can do better to help engage the audience and kind of have it mean something to them. But um, I think anybody out there, listening, should go look at what Brent, what you and your team have done with this, and kind of observe, kind of as a debrief, to say, wow, this is a really good idea. I should maybe that fits with the song I'm working on, or the project I'm working on. But I mean, phenomenal job on this. I mean, the quality's just through the roof, but I think there's so many lessons to be learned from observing and kind of watching this from afar as well.
well, we created 4 videos of songs. 3 of them are actually in the audiobook, and the one song that's called "Orphan Train," that Trey Hensley and Rob Ickes did, along with Tammy Rogers. Tammy came in and sang some harmony, played some fiddle on. Um, that's not actually in the play because it actually tells too much of the story. But we did some really wonderful videos, and those can all be checked out too. Um, um, by, I think you just check out Orphan Train. How would you find those videos? Well, it's on YouTube, and
So, well, I will stick the show notes for this. So wherever you're listening, or if this on YouTube, if you go down in the show notes, we're going to put the links so they can go and find all of those, and we'll put the Audible
great,
links as well. But people need
because
to go
those
listen to
videos are
this.
really
This
cool. They really turned out great.
Absolutely. Well, Brent, this has been an absolutely amazing chat with you. I think we could go for another hour. We need to maybe do this again, because I know you've got dozens and dozens of more stories that I think that are just incredible takeaways and lessons people, just artists in general can learn. We didn't even get to talk about Elvis Presley, but maybe we'll get that on the next one.
We can do that.
Your
We
time.
can do it.
I think, definitely go check out, go listen to the Judds music if you're a musician, and just go listen to some of the sounds. I so enjoyed listening to that. But this Orphan Train project that you have, the Night at Orphan Train, I think there's so many lessons to be learned just about being a good human being, and how it, really took the worst of humanity in a lot of ways and has, showed the best of humanity. And what a cool story arc for, like you said, a movie or stage play. But I think it's just one of those, today more than ever, I think being a good human being and being, as you mentioned, being happy, that's the definition of success. And maybe I'll add one more thing to that definition, is after my conversation with you, is I think you find fulfillment in helping others be happy. So being happy yourself is definitely success, but I think that the lasting success that really makes a difference is in that fulfillment, which is making others and helping others to be happy as well. So
Yeah, I agree 100%, Jason.
So, well, Brent, I feel like I've made a new friend, and wow, this was incredible. I hope anybody listening has just had, so many takeaways, and we definitely need to do this again. So thank you so much for sharing your time. I know you're a really busy guy at the studio, and continue doing amazing things and impacting the world in such positive ways. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having me on your show, and I've enjoyed every second of it.
Hey, it's Jason here, and I hope you've gotten a lot of value out of this episode. Be sure to check out our show notes to learn more about our guest today, and if you'd like to support our podcast, there's a few things that you can do to help us grow. First, if you hit subscribe, it will help ensure that you don't miss a future episode. Second, if you'll share it with your friends on social media or send it via email or message, it helps us spread the word as well. And third, if you'll leave an honest review, it really helps with the algorithms so that other people can find our podcast. Finding success and fulfillment in the music industry is possible, and I look forward to seeing you on our next episode.